This is me. My name is Nazareno Urbano, and for the past 4 years, I have been working as a lead environment artist on Alan Wake 2. And among other things, I'm passionate about graffiti, football, meditation, photography, and most important, I'm passionate about pizza. I've been working in the game industry since 2008. Most of my recent career has been at Remedy, where I work on Quantum Break, Control, and Alan Wake 2. And this talk is about environment world building of the dark place. I think game development can sometimes feel confusing and disorienting, like being lost in the dark. So in this presentation, I will explain how we escape this dark place of development by finding some lights that led us to make the game become real. This presentation is divided into 3 parts. First, I'm going to cover the creative direction of the game. Then I'm going to talk about the visual solution we have implemented to support the creative direction. And then in the end, I'm going to talk about some technical implementation. And this is the table of content for each section of the presentation. And here you can see all the subjects that we're going to cover throughout this presentation. And for those who are not familiar with the game, Alan Wake 2 is a psychological survival horror game. And the player takes the role of 2 characters, Saga Anderson, an FBI agent, and Alan Wake, a writer that has been missing for 13 years. And in the game, we're exploring 2 different worlds. The real world set in the Pacific Northwest, and the dark place, a nightmare dimension. And this talk is about the dark place, and to give you a better context, I'm going to play a trailer.
In a horror story, there are only victims and monsters, and the trick is not to end up as either. But trapped by the genre, we're all ripped to pieces along the way.
No! Welcome. We have a great show for you here tonight. Alan Wake, one of my all-time favorite writers and guests on the show.
He's here to talk about his latest book.
Initiation tells the story of a fictional writer named Alan Wake, who is trapped in a nightmare, desperately trying to find the manuscript of a novel he has forgotten he's written.
Did you write these pages, Mr. Wake?
I'm trying to remember it.
You're the killer, the cult leader.
No! You've got the wrong man! It's my fault! He got out!
Wake has a double. Where is he now?
I don't want to be in the story, just write me out of the story!
And the foundation to build a great and believable world is a great story. The starting point for defining the dark place is the story written by Sam Lake. Narrative is the key component of most of the Remedy games, and it is also what makes them special. The following is a quote from Initiation, the manuscript of the dark place. The dark place is a nightmare dimension. It is a source of dark energy that can make art come true. It makes dreams and nightmare come true. Alan is trapped in the dark place, looking to escape. And so was I, trapped in Sam Lake's story, trying to make the game become real. The writer told me about the atmosphere. Wake is a writer of hard-boiled crime novels about Alex Casey. And the atmosphere we need to recreate, it's a seedy and dangerous New York of his crime fiction books. And we do not want to replicate New York as it is. The city must feel like a bad dream, wet, cold, and dark. We want to create a fictional New York that fits the narrative. And all of it, it's part of the construct. So what is this construct? The nature of the dark place is built from a crooked mirror reflection of Alan's mind. And the dark place can manifest as a mental construct. At the same time, we are trapped in a horror story. The dark place must be scary, a looping nightmare dimension. The dark place works in loops and spirals. Alan is trying to escape the dark place by rewriting the story, and he must make the horror come true to escape the dark place. And so he's lost and trapped in his own nightmare. And so after understanding the creative direction of the game, we need to think about some visual solutions. We need to build an atmosphere and also a world that is built from a mind construct. So how do we start building the atmosphere? We start by using the story as a light to start our research into the darkness. We were doing research about New York, but went deeper than a simple image search. We were diving and learning about the history of the place, and also study relevant films and books. We identified the most iconic elements, something that will be recognizable as an archetype of a big city. And those elements can sometimes be bridges, dark alleys, elevated railways, and also tall buildings. And there is a collective memory of New York. And what we want to do is to steal those memories and then use them to build the world. And this memory can come from movies, comics, photography, and also other media. And for example, we look at the Scorsese movies for inspiration, and Taxi Driver was one of our main references. And then I became obsessed with research and created numerous reference boards, and then in my mind it started forming a new version of New York. We applied our research and ideas and created the first version of the dark place. And during this phase of pre-production, we were exploring the atmosphere, we were building prototypes, and find ways to integrate narrative and gameplay, and also trying to understand how in the world we're going to build this dark place. And to give you a better context of the production pipeline at Remedy, every project goes through a stage gate process. So we have a mandate stage that define the strategic goals. Then in the concept stage, we define the high-level creative vision. And this is a product of the collaboration between the three directors, Sam, Jan, and Kyle. And during this concept phase, they all work together and define how the dark place works. But they also make sure that narrative, art, and gameplay work together, but also support each other. And then we take this high-level creative vision and then create the proof of concept build. So we translate that into a playable build that show that the game is fun and it works, but we also focus on the risks and the innovation. And we created some concept art, and we explore different ideas. And for example, at the end of the first game, Alan dives into Cauldron Lake and ends up in the dark place. And water is one of the main themes of the game, and we wanted to express it in different forms. So we drew inspiration from underwater visuals, but at the same time, we wanted the dark place to look like a realistic city. Eventually, this underwater feeling was translated with on-screen visual effects, surface material treatment, but we also decided in the dark place it was always raining. And here you can see the first prototype of directional flowing darkness effect. And this is how then we implemented this proof of concept idea into the final game. And then here it's when we apply the rain visual effects on top. And for the proof of concept level, we have created a small city intersection. And we wanted to create something that would be somehow recognizable as New York. And this was our playground to experiment and also fail. And we built prototypes for light shifters. And light shifters are unstable lights that can change the environment around them. And by doing that, they help Alan to progress in the game. We built prototypes for plotboard where Alan finds clues and moves them around to change reality. And again, this will help him to progress in the story. And for this build, we have created a full 30-minute mission. And in this mission, we have tested some combat spaces. We have combined the light shifter gameplay with narrative and also tried to give the impression of a looping environment. We also did this test for Chase with the dark presence and explore navigation in narrow spaces such as fire escape and also small windows. And the first version of the dark place was a painful learning process. We did identify the main problem that we had with the mission flow. So we had too much backtracking. Most of the puzzles were very confusing and the narrative was very complex. But another thing we have learned is that the dark place was too dark. And this means that the scale, proportion, and silhouette, they play a big role in the look of the city, but also that we needed to have a bit more light to see. And another thing we have found out is we defined the main feature we were going to need to build this looping environment. And the first feature were the light shifters, so unstable light that can change the environment. The second feature was the reality rewrite. So with the plotboard, Alan can change the environment around him. And then the teleports, which are essentially enclosed space that we use to teleport the player around. We've also learned that flat city intersections are quite boring, especially because the player speed in our game is very, very slow. And in the mission, we had a lot of backtracking, so it was not fun for Alan to traverse these big roads with no elevation, and that's why he was quite sad. And so we applied this learning from the proof of concept in the final game layout. And so we have built an elevated plaza in the middle that acts as a centerpiece. And then we added the High Line next to the plaza, and that creates creates a nice elevated shape. And then instead of the classic cross intersection, we have built this V-shape intersection. And then we add even more elevation by creating rooftop gameplay. This video shows the level layout of the proof of concept level. And this is one of the earlier versions of the actual Dark Place layout. And as you can see here, the streets are still quite wide. And then to reach the final layout, we iterate a lot on the size and position of the building and also the streets. And these are other examples of before and after of the same layout. And we decide to place Casey Alley on an even lower level compared to the street to create even more elevation. And this is a top-down map of the Dark Place. And we designed the world in a way that every key location of the game is visible from the center plaza. And from there, you can also see all the iconic elements of the city, such as the High Line, the bridges, and the alley. And then we had assigned one artist working on each location, and we all felt like we wanted to escape the Dark Place. To continue on the learning, we have learned that using too many light shifters would increase the scope and complexity of the environment. And then we needed to have less of them and also find better ways to manage the resources. So we applied this learning in the final game layout. So we have spread the light shifter across the whole Dark Place, and we made sure we had a lot of space between them, as well as having something interesting to see. And we find out that fire escape were very problematic, especially for navigation, collision, and camera. And so we decided to cut them from the game, mainly because we didn't want to scale them up and make them look unrealistic. Because everything in the game must be as close to a realistic scale as possible. Because that will help the horror experience, and it makes the environment look real. So we didn't scale any asset. We also find out the small interior apartments were very expensive to build, and they were not very useful for combat spaces. But instead, we decided to use them mainly for narrative and exploration. And to continue talk about the visual solution, we need to talk about the construct. The construct is the main pillar of the world building in the Dark Place, because everything that the player sees comes from Alan's mind. So how do we build an environment from a mind construct? The way we approach the world building, it's seen through, and also asset creation, it's seen through the light of archetypes. So even though we reference New York of the 70s and early 80s, we do not refer to a specific timeline, and that's because the construct does not belong to a precise timeline. And we use the quintessential version of an asset instead of the more contemporary one, and in general, we do favor timeless and iconic models. And to give you an example, when we create one asset, we collect a lot of different reference photos, and then we review them. And in this example, we needed to decide what cache register we're going to build for the game. Although they look quite similar, the second one has few Bezier curves, and that makes the asset look too modern. So we decided to go with the first reference, and then end up building something like this for the game. And this is another example where we choose a bit older model when it helps to build the right kind of atmosphere. And then end up building something like this for the game. And to support the construct of the dark place, every object with text is an opportunity to add depth into the story. And graffiti is an important asset that contributes to the world building. It is very characteristic of New York of the 80s, and it's also part of an archetype of any big metropolitan city. But to be part of the construct, the words in the graffiti must come from Alan's mind. And I grew up making graffiti, and I usually try to add them to every project I work on. And the dark place felt like the perfect opportunity to merge graffiti, narrative, and also video games. And I did not want to just make street art, again, because it's too modern. But instead, we wanted to create a nightmare version of the old school New York graffiti. And then use them everywhere around the city and the dark place. And the writers gave us a list of words coming from Alan's mind, and we were only allowed to use these words and nothing else. So we hired a graffiti artist and then built the nightmare graffiti in the real world. And then we took photos of them and then create textures and made projected decals out of it. And we've created this big canvas with a lot of layer tags and color. And a lot of the graffiti are dripping and leaking, again to reinforce the horror feeling of the game and the dark place. We wanted to have also shadowy figures in the dark place, something that would complement the real enemy fade out in the game, and also make the player constantly second-guessing what they're seeing. The artists also experiment with different shapes and symbols. And we also reinterpret various symbols that have a deeper meaning with the Remedy connected universe, such as the spiral and the triangles. And then we added the graffiti into the dark place. And as an example, this is the base environment without any projected decals. And this is how it looks when we apply a layer of graffiti. And graffiti can add a lot of color to the image, but they also can be reused across most of the environment in the game. They also add another storytelling layer to the world. And they help the world building by blending all the environments together. And another way to add words into the dark place is the use of newspapers. And here the inspiration again comes from the photos of New York of the 70s, where the streets were filled with like newspapers and trash. But because they contain written words, the text must come from Alan's mind. So we collaborated with a graphic agency called Lane and Hallami and created a set of fictional newspaper to use in the dark place. And all of the headlines in this paper, they have a narrative link to the story. And billboards and posters are also a great opportunity to add big images to the world and make the city feel more believable. So we created many posters and billboards, and then used them everywhere around the city. And for another example, like this is the base layer of the city. And this is how it looks when we apply papers, graffiti, posters, and also billboards. And Alan Wake is a writer, and words are very important to him. So we wanted to give the impression that the whole dark place was talking to Alan and the player. And there are no generic signs in the dark place. And here are some examples on how we apply that idea to something that might feel generic as a license plate or construction signs or the subway indication. And for example, the text in the construction sign on the right is what Alan wrote in the first game. And neon signs are also one important aspect of building the atmosphere. Same as the other text, they're also part of the construct. We use neon to create the feeling of floating words in space. At the same time, we were having a lot of trouble with player guidance because the level is quite open. So we decided to use the neon sign to guide Alan and the player. And in this instance, we wanted the player to go left. So I thought, what about adding a sign that says this way? And the director did like the prototype idea, so eventually we implemented it. This is the implementation in the game with the more meaningful narrative link. And we implemented various neon signs, all with a narrative link to the story or the mission. And after covering the creative direction and the visual solution, we can talk a bit about the technical implementation. So how do we create a looping nightmare environment? The Dark Place progression is divided in loops. Alan always starts from the same location in the talk show studio. And Alan is trying to escape the dark place by rewriting reality and the story. And by doing that, he's able to change the environment around him. The dark place can act in a dreamlike way. At each loop, a building can appear and also disappear. And this concept shows the state of the dark place during the first loop. And then when Alan gets to the second loop, a new building has appeared in the space. And one feature that we use to create a feeling of impossible transition is the seamless teleports. And here is an example.
The Ocean View Hotel, my destination.
So Alan is trying to enter the hotel. But then he gets teleported back.
A loop that delivered me back to the street. What did the mystery caller said? If the waves keep pushing you away, you just need to find another way in. With only dream logic to lead me to the hotel, I look to the neon signs for guidance.
And this is another example of teleport. So when Alan enters the stairs, he gets teleported to another point in the level. And the player does not notice the transition, and we wanted to create the feeling of being lost. And the way this works, essentially we are using the same prefab in two different positions, and this ensures the environment is exactly the same. And then once the player hits the trigger in the middle of the stairs, they get teleported to the other point in the level. We also use teleport as a transition in between levels. And in this case, the Ocean View Hotel building is quite small compared to its interior layout. And so after Alan passes the sky bridge, he gets teleported to the real layout, which is this, and it's underground. And as you can see, this layout is way bigger compared to the small exterior building. And so the seamless teleport allowed us to create impossible transition and also looping spaces. But also was good to teleport the player to the actual layout without changing the structure of the level. So it was good for creating looping environment. But on the other hand, we had to constantly iterate on the teleports because all the system must behave correctly in both teleports. So this feature required a lot of iteration, and it did cause a lot of bugs. And Alan can rewrite the story and change the environment. And in the dark place, we have defined areas in the environment where Alan can rewrite the story and change the reality. So when he's in the writer's room, he has access to this plot board. And in here, he can select a different plot element with different story, and then apply them to the scene. And by doing so, the environment will change. And the way this works, we have, so each environment is divided into asset nodes, and they could be seen as some sorts of containers. So each asset node includes all the specific permutation of that plot element, and then we swap them dynamically via script. And as you can see in the scene in the editor, it becomes very messy because all of the elements are in the same space, one on top of each other. And most of these scenes, they required a lot of concept art support, and we did multiple iterations on them to create the final image, and also to understand the narrative. So they required a lot of concept art. And also, each plot element increased the scope of the environment because the propping is custom to each scene. And the scope does not just increase for the environment artist, but for all the crafts, because each element has a different lighting, different sound, different narrative, and they all need to work in the same space. So the scope increased for all the crafts. And what we end up doing during production is that we scope down and then prioritize each scene and then focus mainly on the critical one. And another key feature of the dark place are the light shifters. Light shifters are unstable lights that can change the environment. They have essentially two states, charged and uncharged. And each state has a different environment in it. And I've been trying to explain in a simple way why the light shifter were a major challenge for the team. And unfortunately, this is the best I came up with. And so from the art direction point of view, the art director can require that light shifters are not just a door. But then most of our design were just a door appearing. And then the lighting artist would complain, saying, I cannot just add the light on a door. And at the same time, we had a lot of problem with game design and UR because the player did not understand that this specific light was important, so they were stuck in the mission. And what we end up doing during production is that we created a lot of different prototypes, and we constantly failed. We asked concept art to help us, and then we created some custom concept art for this. And then on the design side, we decided the shifters are the only blinking light in the space, but we also iterate a lot on the UI and the audio to improve guidance and also visibility. And here you can see the uncharged light shifter, and at the end of the alley, there is a charged one. And because of the amount of lights in the space, our lighting team worked with the art director to establish a clear hierarchy of lights. So gameplay lights, they must be pure in color, and they're brighter than any other lights. And then we use a neon sign that they have like a dimmer intensity and they are colored. And same for other backdrop lights.
My path was blocked. I had to find a way through. The lights would help me.
And the light shifter are the main tool we use to create environment puzzles, and also to create this feeling of being lost in a maze. And the light shifter are also very expensive to build, and they require a full collaboration between design, audio, and VART, and also lighting. And we did iterate an infinite amount of time because of player guidance. In a city with a lot of lights, it was very hard to make the player understand that this specific light is important. So this feature required a lot of iteration. And then during pre-production, we were seeing them as like a reusable system that we could easily use to make puzzle. But in reality, each light shifter ended up being unique. And this means that they all come with different problems, and they're like very hard to debug. And Alan was sad again. And so we have covered the three main features of the Dark Place, and moving towards the last section of the talk. Let's talk about the live action in the game. The nature of the Dark Place allows us to use live action footage to express a different layer of reality. And live action is seamlessly integrated with gameplay, and it is just another manifestation of the Dark Place on a different level. And in this example, Alan is looking for Zane's room. So we use live action footage to transition between these layers of reality.
The room was empty except for the projector. More games. Was the film a message waiting to be played?
So Alan is interacting with the projector, and this allows a transition into the live action, where Zane's room is. And this room only exists in the live action. It does not exist in the 3D environment. And the layer of reality in the Dark Place can be expressed in different forms. For example, it can manifest as a supernatural musical.
He could write a new story like Tom Zane before him, and maybe they'd be happy once again. Just one shot, one more chance for him to save their marriage away from the city, a romantic getaway.
So one of our main reference for the stage we're building was the movie Dogville. And we wanted to use a minimal environment stage approach, and this movie uses a theater technique to delimit different spaces. With just a line on the ground, they define the rooms and the streets. So we adopted the same minimal approach in the game environment. But that's also because the projections were going to do a big part of the heavy lifting in the image composition. And the way the projections are working, it's quite simple. We have created a cube and then mapped an emissive video texture to it. And then attached to the cube, we have a spotlight that uses a video as volumetric projection. And here we can see the spotlight projection. So we use a lower MIP map of the video texture. And that creates this volumetric effect that match what's in the video. And the dark place can also manifest into our reality. And some of the characters from the game escaped the dark place and start dancing on stage at the Game Awards. We did not expect that when making the game. And to talk a bit about the learning from this live-action pipeline, it's good to keep in mind that the 3D environment and the live-action set, they need to match. And there cannot be a big discrepancy. And for us, the most efficient way was to build first the 3D environment and then let the live-action crew recreate that on the set. And this is one of my personal nightmares. So during previous project, we have experienced some issues with the communication and then ended up with the real white box lamp in the shoots. And that's not a final model. And also it ended up in all of the live action materials. And this quickly became one of the top Remedy memes. And so it requires a coordinated effort to plan the shoots. And when we were creating this environment for the game, we gave priority to all the live action location in the game and created a special concept art. And then we built the environment in 3D up to alpha quality. And then send all the assets to the live action crew. And we've covered all the section of the presentation, and we can talk about the conclusion. So I think the creative journey of making a game, it's similar to trying to escape a dark place. And in both instances, you need to find the light to make it out. So your first light can be the story, so let the story inspire you. And then decide what kind of atmosphere you want to create. In our case, was a noir crime city, echo of New York, dark and grimy. Then find your own construct and decide what kind of asset can be used in your game, what kind of archetype can be used. For us, was a place built from memories where words have a deeper meaning and also the reality is subjective. And then define what kind of experience you want the player to feel. And for us was a horror story with a looping environment, and Alan was trapped. And then in my experience, one of the biggest light will always be your team. So be truthful to them and be there for them all the time. try to be compassionate and understand other people's difficulties, because making game is very hard. And then be tolerant and kind, because building a world requires a lot of time, passion, and dedication. So solve problems together and always strive to create something original and unique. And whatever you do, stay in the light. Thank you. Maybe questions?
Hey, that was really cool. And first of all, I got to say, this is one of the most unique and amazing, like visually speaking, games I've ever seen. So, great job. It's cool. I thought it was really interesting that you hired a graffiti artist externally, especially since you already had a passion for that. I was curious if you could just talk a little bit more about like what that, like why did you all decide to hire externally rather than, I don't know, maybe you making it or something like that?
Yeah.
And what in particular, like what kind of criteria you were looking for with that artist?
Yeah. So the artist we hired is actually my best friend. And we grew up making graffiti together, and then he ended up being like a real artist. So he does painting and he's a street artist. So when doing The Dark Place, I knew he was the right guy to do the job, because he can do like a lot of different styles. And if you notice, if you know a bit about graffiti, there are so many different styles, so each person has his own. And my friend has a lot of different personalities, and he managed actually to create such a nice variety of different style of graffiti. And he also likes to draw like monsters and like horror and like painting, so I was like, he's the perfect fit. And I know him, so it's very easy to collaborate.
Very cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Game looks awesome. I still haven't played it. I'm like working my way through Control, so
yeah,
not enough time to play games when you make them. So, earlier on you talked about learnings in the early prototyping stage, and you mentioned how the game had too much backtracking, confusing puzzles, and things like that. It was too dark, and how do you keep the focus on track? How do you keep? Is there ever a point where people are like, well, it should be confusing. There should be backtracking or something like that, even if it's like, does that make sense, that question?
Kind of, yeah.
But like someone could argue that the narrative says that it should be confusing, it should be, even if it's not fun.
Yeah.
How do you stop that argument from kind of winning over making fun gameplay? Because they say it fits the narrative, it should be confusing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I think we never really like stopped the argument. Sorry? Oh, it's about I guess the level layout being confusing, but the story is also confusing. So how do you deal with that? I guess kind of. Was that your question? But I know what you mean. We constantly like iterate, and we did a lot of playtest. I also collaborate a lot with the level designer and game designer, and we constantly test every prototype. And it's very hard because Alan is trapped and is lost, so it's supposed to be confusing, and the environment is looping, but it's very hard to make it fun in a way. Right. It was very hard to design, and we just iterated like a lot. And then we had to ship, so we're like, okay, this is fine again.
Okay. All right. Interesting. Thanks.
Hello.
Hi. Fantastic talk. And as a native New Yorker, fantastic job creating a version of New York City.
Thank you.
That represented how dirty New York City was when I was living there. I did want to ask a question about the collaboration between multiple teams. You mentioned user research informing some of the decisions in the game, and as a user researcher myself, I was just interested in understanding the cadence of user research and how that affected your teams, and possibly some of the impact that that had on the work that you did specifically.
Yeah, thanks for the question. So it's about UR testing.
Yeah.
So we do a lot of UR research throughout the whole project. I would say maybe every 2 months or so. Like as soon as we have something, we just organize like a UR test, and then we can look at people playing and see how they play. And then based on that, that's always very, very helpful, because we see when they get stuck, what happened, what do they do, and most of the time it's something that you don't expect that they do. And based on that, we actually iterate a lot on the level design side and on the layout. So it helps a lot. Like the more you can do it, I think the better it is.
Did you find that your teams took well to some of the findings that the user research team found? And if so, what were some of the challenges adapting some of the findings that the user research team articulated to the various teams that you work with? Yeah,
it's a tricky question. In general, I think if something comes from UR, we do fix it. Especially if it's critical or major, we do fix it. If we find out that something is on a minor level, that maybe not, but we tend to react on that very quickly, so we don't wait time to fix those. But there is a point in production where like you cannot change so much the level. So later on, at the end of alpha or so, you can do only like small adjustment, like lights. There was one very, very painful light shifter that we, I think, iterate until the day before shipping. And this light shifter was actually inside a plot element, and inside that there was also a teleport. So it was like a nested mess of things. But then towards the end, we did fix the UR issue with the audio and lighting, because usually those are actually kind of easy to add later on without changing the layout. So that was one example.
Awesome, thank you so much.
No problem.
I had a question about like how level design and environmental art work together.
Yeah.
I'm currently working at a very small team, so it's basically one designer and one artist. And we don't really know like where one thing turns into the other. So I wanted to know, what do you normally receive from level design department, and what do you normally get? And that back and forth to define kind of the layout and how it affects gameplay and narrative.
Yeah. So the way we structure the team, the mission team, is that we have, it goes in couples. So we have one artist and one designer, and they all work together on the same location, and it's up to them to iterate on the layout. So it's, to me, it should be almost like a married couple, because they really need to solve the problem together and understand that art is important, but also level design, layout, and gameplay is also very important. And in general, they sit in the same room, so we have the mission team structure is divided into like hubs. So we have Dark Place, Cauldron Lake, Water in Brightfall, that are 4 rooms. And in those rooms, we have artist and designer, level designer together. So I would suggest keep them as close as you can, and let them like iterate a lot.
Okay, thank you very much.
Hi. I was curious about the like live action pipeline, like kind of how you decided like where those transitions happened, or if you like had to, I guess kind of like chicken and the egg, like what comes first of like, do you guys like decide like, oh, we really want like a live action sequence here, and then transitions to like a new level, or kind of like how much oversight does like the 3D team have over like the set production? Because I assume those are like different, like completely different like studios or pipelines. Yeah,
there are 2 separate pipelines. So for the Dark Place, we decided that all the cinematics, almost except one, they are in live action. So we decided all that pipeline was going to be live action. It's not just for a scoping or a budget point of view, but it's also because it fits the dark place. So because of the reality and the different layer, in that sense, it makes a lot of sense to use live action as cinematic. And I think in general, like 3D cinematics are very, very expensive. Live action was actually cheaper in a way, but it also fit the narrative and the story. And then in the real world, we have the normal cinematics. So that was our thinking.
Did you have any like issues with just like if one gets like ahead of the other, or did you just kind of have them all self-contained enough where like it didn't, you know, you could just work on them concurrently? And then I'm asking because like I'm interested. I'm on a very small indie team, but like I want to do like, you know, that kind of like sequencing. But I'm curious like.
Do it. Use live action.
But I'm just curious at like, you know, at what that level kind of like how much of an effort is it to like just coordinate both of that? Because that's obviously like very, very different like mediums you're working with.
Yeah, I'm not very familiar with that. We have a team that deals with the whole live action pipeline. And also for the game, it was defined from the story point of view. So from the narrative team actually decide when a cinematic happens and where. And for the environment artists, we only knew that, okay, that space needs to be in live action. So let's build it fast and let's review it a lot. And then let's send it to the live action.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. All right. Thank you so much.